Ben Pearson, the Roadster Tracker, and today we're going to talk about Ingenuity. And to help illustrate it, I am playing the game Rover Mechanic Simulator, which has a recent DLC that has updates that include Perseverance and even little Ingenuity. This is Ingenuity. This is going to be the first vehicle to fly on Mars, hopefully. It landed with Ingenuity. You can see it's got kind of a little interesting shape, and note that it's pretty tall, really. These legs are deployable in its upright stowed configuration. They're actually folded up. It's a pretty neat little thing. It doesn't really have any scientific instruments. It's kind of hard to see the bottom, and I don't think they did a very good job of it. But there is a little camera that's right over here, and some sensors that basically help it land, but that's about it. It's a really simple robot overall. It has a solar panel here on the top, which is dirty in this model. It's Rover Mechanic Simulator. You gotta go and fix the things, right? This solar panel has to provide enough power to mostly keep it alive. One of the biggest problems that this thing has is staying alive during the Martian night. You see, the electronics, and especially the batteries, they have to stay above a certain temperature, else they just don't work that well. Don't know why we've never tried low temperature batteries that work for this kind of situation. It may be that there's some chemistry that would work better, but the batteries that we have are low temperature, and so they have to keep everything warm enough to survive because of the low temperatures. They just won't work that well. It has these legs that are deployed. One of the differences you'll note is one of the legs has a little hook thing. The other ones appear identical. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we show where this is actually stored in Perseverance. The various parts are made out of mostly carbon fiber. It's really, really lightweight. To get this thing to run is insane. It has to take off at a crazy high RPM. Mars has roughly a third of the gravity, which helps a lot, but it is also a much, much thinner atmosphere. And even though it landed in a relatively low spot, Jezero Crater is pretty low on Mars, you have roughly 1/100th of the atmosphere. So this is like flying at maybe Mount Everest roughly. It's really, really rough, and the temperature is probably pretty close to that too. It's just not something that's very easy, but it's hopefully going to make it. It's got to be deployed, and we'll talk about that shortly. But it's a pretty neat little thing, and I am very much looking forward to seeing this. I hope that we're able to capture some video of this. Some other things of note: it's expected to last for about 90 days. It can relay using this antenna back to Percy, and I'll show you where the antenna that receives is on Perseverance when we get over there. Overall, though, it's pretty neat. And just for the fun of it, you can see that the problem here is this leg is broken and the solar panel needs to be cleaned, and then this spot will be fine, but I'll go ahead and take care of that offline. This is Perseverance. Let's give you a little bit of a tour as far as Ingenuity is concerned. You can see, let's jump up here. This is the antenna, the helicopter antenna that will allow for control. It's a pretty short range thing, but it should work over a line of sight, and it's expected that Ingenuity will not be particularly far. Now, when I first heard there was going to be a helicopter, the first spot that I thought of putting it was somewhere on the flight deck. You could just bolt the legs down and release the flight legs, and that'd be pretty easy. But you look around here, and I mean, do you really want to have this little test experiment be flying with all of this really sensitive stuff, the antennas and all of this stuff? Who knows if the thing's going to work? Do you really want to try that out? And I started thinking, no. So there's a couple of options. You could either have the arm here somehow hold on to it and deploy it down on the surface, similar to how Insight did with some of its instruments. And that would be a possibility, I suppose, but then you have to somehow interface with that, and it just didn't seem to work out so well. So what did they actually do? Well, let's go for a tour here. Let's raise this thing up. Okay. So if we go and look on the underneath here, you can see there's a bunch of hardware. This hardware is actually to deploy Ingenuity. It's going to be folded sideways. So I believe the rotors are facing towards this direction, and on the other side will be, well, the bottom of it where the legs will be eventually when they're deployed, but they're all folded up and it's just fitting into this nice little tiny neat package. I'll add a video in here that shows how it is actually on the spacecraft. They did some deployment tests on Earth, and you can see how it was deployed. So, first of all, there is a shield that will protect it. Keep in mind that when this is going through the atmosphere, after the heat shield is deployed, it's still trying to find its way down to the surface. And, this is fairly potentially damaging wind, and Ingenuity is made out of some really light stuff. It's just not meant to handle that kind of velocity. You see, everything down here is pretty rugged. You have a lot of protection on this kind of stuff. I don't know, maybe there's a case or something that is deployed for this. The caching assembly. Oh, so this is where it's released. There's probably a case that deploys here, but this is really rugged. All of the more sensitive stuff is up there other than like a camera, which you gotta have a camera if you're gonna do it, and we'll get the live video from that soon. But for the most part, this stuff here is pretty sensitive. So there's a shielding that's covering it, and it's tied here to the belly. Just to get you an idea, let's see. The belly has a decent amount of clearance above the ground. It is not going to be that close, but it's a relatively short distance, only a few inches above types of rocks that it's supposed to be able to drive across. So what they're going to do is find a flat spot, and they have up to 10 days to drive there, and they have a few days to find that spot. And so Perseverance will then drive over there, and then they will ditch the shielding at some point in time there. If I were them, I would wait for a little while. It may help to keep it warm. Right now, it's being charged by the nuclear batteries in Perseverance. I imagine these plugs here are for that very purpose, although it's a little bit hard to actually know. Maybe it's these ones, who knows. Something down here, though, is definitely providing power to Ingenuity. It will eventually, though, have to power itself with the solar power and try its best to keep alive. So the panel protection will then deploy, and then it has this crazy folding sequence. There's actually a hole, I think right here, that one of the rotors will go through during its sequence to be able to deploy here. So it has to then slowly get itself in the correct position. Then it will drop down to the surface, and then once it's on the surface, then Perseverance will drive forward and come over here. We'll have the little rover on the surface. They'll make sure that it's working well, and hopefully that next day it will be able to take flight. It'll just take a couple of short flights. One of the interesting things, and I learned this recently with the Apollo program, landing on the moon, it's a little bit hard to explain, but if you're flying a helicopter on Earth, that's kind of sort of similar in some ways to landing the lunar rover on the moon, with one very big exception. And that is if you tilt just a little bit forward on Earth, because you're pushing against gravity, you have some thrust already, and that will cause you to move forward a fair bit. You don't have to really tilt the blade that much to move forward. On the moon, though, your thrust at hovering is much, much less. So if you tilt over a little bit, you're not going to move very fast. So if you're going to try to move a fair distance, you kind of have to have this experience. Well, Martian gravity is 38% of Earth, so they're going to have to take that into account. And I've never actually heard them how they've tested that. They have tested that Ingenuity flies inside of a vacuum, and it's looking pretty decent with all of the tests it's done there. But it's a little bit dicey, to say the least. I'm quite curious to see how it works. it's going to have to stay fairly close to Perseverance because they may want to photograph it. They're definitely going to take a video flight. They haven't announced that, but they would be silly not to with the capability to take video. That's something we're going to want to see, and it will help with the testing quite a bit. It does have the camera, and it can relay those images, I believe, through this antenna back to the main processor and, eventually back to Earth through the satellites. One other thing of note, I think if we look in this panel here, you can actually see the radios that this is functioning on. And overall, though, it's a pretty neat system. It's not really much. It's really just a test that they could look. You see the electronics. This is all of the electronics that can control everything. Don't know how accurate the inside of these boxes are. I imagine it's not as accurate as the outside. But it's the thought that counts, right? So anyways, Perseverance and Ingenuity are currently on the surface of Mars. I am very much looking forward to them actually taking flight. That will hopefully be pretty soon. Let me know whatever questions or comments you guys have. If you want to check out this game, it is pretty neat. I would suggest it. And thanks for everything. Let me know whatever questions you guys have or just general thoughts about this. I'm really excited to see this. This Perseverance rover, it's neat, but while it does have some cool things, the entry video and stuff is just going to be amazing. There's so many different cameras. It's Ingenuity that we had over here on this bench. We can't have both at the same time, unfortunately. That is going to be the real game changer. Ingenuity to allow for powered flight on another world is going to be amazing. And eventually we're going to send something over to Saturn's moon Titan and be able to fly around there. This will be a good test, although Titan's much easier to fly around in than Mars. That one will have to use a nuclear battery, though similar to the RTG here that is Perseverance is using. May even be the same design, I don't know. But it'll have to carry a lot more lift. But the atmosphere is much, much thicker in Titan. And so it should be able to fly quite well, as XKCD has a nice little demonstration. Thank you guys so much for everything. Until next time, keep on tracking. Take care, guys.